Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I've got some news from you fresh from the Super Test server. I give to you the Turtle. This is a tier 8 premium British super heavy armoured tank destroyer, and it pretty much looks as if it's the offspring of a badger and a tortoise. Today I'm going to let you know everything there is to know about the Turtle and whether I think that it's maybe going to be of interest if it comes into the game with its current statistics. So firstly, let's have a good look of the model of this vehicle. So immediately when I look at this, I think about flat armoured plates here, maybe taking heat rounds. Looks like these front plates here will bounce pretty much everything. I think the upper hull as well, apart from maybe some tier 10 tank destroyer rounds. Lower plate looks like it's angled slightly downwards, although maybe if you're at a distance and you're getting a flush shot up into the lower plate, if it's just cresting a ridgeline, it might be a bit of a weak point, but it's likely to be very thick. Interestingly enough, unlike something like the AT-15A, the tier 8 standard counterpart, which has a weak point on top of the vehicle that we can see here, this one doesn't really seem like it has one. And so if you do get this thing hull down, I think it's going to be a lot like the TS5, which went into the game fairly recently. Let's take a look at the side of the Turtle. Looks like they've already fleshed out the models. This thing is looking like it's pretty much ready to go into the game with a few more touch-ups, unlike, for example, the Kampfpanzer 50T, which I highlighted a couple of months ago, which the model was very much unfinished. One thing to highlight here is this big old side plate. This is very likely to be very softly armored, and it's just so juicy to have side shots that you can either go through the track and into the hull, although it does actually look like the tracks kind of are over the back of the hull. And so that means that if you've really got this thing flat on the side, it could be quite tricky to track it and also damage the hull. Whereas frontally, doesn't look like you should have too much of a problem unless the thing has truly monstrous side armor. So before we take a look at the statistics of the Turtle, let me highlight that everything is subject to change. This is a super test, and this is in no way the final statistics that we're going to have for the vehicle. However, we'll get a very good idea for what Wargaming have planned for this tank, at least in the preliminary stages. So I've taken all of the statistics that we see here, and of course I've put them onto an Excel spreadsheet so we can see how it compares to the AT-15. So immediately you'll notice that the Turtle, well, we don't quite know what caliber of a gun it's going to have. However, from the alpha damage, which is 330, I think this is the first tank that has 330 alpha damage, it's probably going to be 105mm or 100mm main armament. And while that's certainly better than the 83.4mm that the AT-15 has, it's not really going to overmatch that many more plates apart from a 30mm plate. One thing for sure is that this alpha damage is kind of right in the middle of where the AT-15 is and where the tier 9 tank, the Tortoise, is with its 400 alpha damage. And so it'll be interesting to see how the Turtle works out, because that's obviously one of the things that holds back the AT-15, that unless you're firing multiple rounds into your opponent, more often than not, you're going to get horribly out-traded. Alright, so the gold damage on this vehicle is 330 and the high explosive rounds do 430. It's not the biggest high explosive round I've ever seen, and with 54mm of penetration on it, it's going to be quite hard to be able to penetrate reliably and to pump up that already excellent damage per minute. Alright, the penetration on this supposedly 105mm main armament is 217. Now, this is definitely not very good for a tier 8 tank destroyer. Most tier 8 tank destroyers have got about 250 minimum, and when you load premium rounds, you're kind of hoping that you've got up to 300mm of penetration at tier 8. It's not the case with this tank. It's going to have terrible standard pen at 217, worse than the 83.4mm on the AT-15, and also its gold penetration is 245. This thing isn't going to be very reliable against tier 10 tanks. It's going to have to get up into the faces of your opponents, try and track them, try and get to the side to be able to make that gun work, even with the premium rounds on the tank. So, one thing, however, that is exceptional about the Turtle is the rate of fire. It fires over 9 rounds a minute with 330 alpha damage. Let's put that into perspective. That's pretty much the same rate of fire that the Object 140 has at tier 10 medium tank. However, with that 330 alpha, that's better than the 320 that the tier 10 medium tank will have, giving this vehicle 3,000 damage per minute exactly. And that makes the impressive damage per minute of the AT-15 of 2,760 look fairly mediocre. This will give the Turtle the highest DPM in the game at tier 8 outside of the ISU-130 when the vehicle is firing its premium rounds, which only have 187mm of penetration. And to be fair to the Turtle, there are only a handful of vehicles at tier 9, primarily British tank destroyers, that have higher damage per minute than it, and at tier 10 there's probably only about 10 tanks in the game that will be able to out-trade the vehicle in a raw damage per minute stance. So this means that while the Turtle is definitely not a threat with regards to how likely it is to penetrate you, If it can, it's going to rip you apart faster than any vehicle at tier 8. Consequently, I think this is going to definitely be a vehicle for any of you out there who fancy yourself as a bit of a marksman, or you just like to fight up close and personal without having excess penetration. And when you combine a very good rate of fire of over 9 rounds a minute with a decent alpha damage of 330, this thing is going to be able to track its opponents, be able to advance around them, and get into penetration positions where it's going to be able to take the tracks off and also enter the hull. Alright, so now let's move on to the gun handling of the Turtle. The accuracy at 0.34 is definitely not terrible, but it's way worse than the AT-15. 1.7 aim time is fantastic, however, and unless we see the hidden gun statistics of this vehicle, the hidden dispersion values, and they make them absolutely horrible, it's quite likely this thing is going to be able to snapshot very well, like the AT-15 can at 1.7 seconds. It has 10 degrees of gun depression and 20 degrees of gun elevation, which is better than the AT-15. So this is going to allow the tank to very much work ridge lines, and when we consider that the vehicle doesn't really have too many weak points on top, or even a very well angled upper hull armor, when you're using your gun depression on this thing, I think its armor will be truly monstrous. Okay, so while the vehicle doesn't have a turret, it does have a gun that can extend very far to the left and right. 20 degrees to the left and 20 degrees to the right. Now, while that's a little bit worse than the AT-15's fantastic 25 degrees to the left and the right, that's still very flexible. This is not a narrow gun arc, and you're going to have a nice 40-degree angle to be able to work your opponents, which should allow you to sit still longer, or alternatively, if you get tracked, to keep on training your gun on them. Now onto mobility, and a vehicle called the Turtle, I don't think we can expect too much here. An 800 horsepower engine, which is actually 150 horsepower better than the AT-15, will give this vehicle a pretty okay power to weight ratio for a vehicle that's called the Turtle, right? 13.3 is not too shabby. There are many heavy tanks that would love to have a power to weight like that, and so this thing will accelerate quite quickly, even up slopes, up to its top speed limit of 20 kilometers an hour. Oh my lord, yeah, this thing is slow. Just like the Tortoise at tier 9, and just like the AT-15 at tier 8, its standard competition. 20 kilometers an hour is not going to allow you to advance into any positions very quickly. It's one of the biggest balancing factors of the British tank destroyers. You have to decide what flank you're going to go to early on the battle, effectively commit to it, and then keep pushing forward no matter what the opposition are going to be. And I guess with all of the armor that this thing has on the front, 228, 101 on the side and 76 on the rear, definitely not nearly as good as the AT-15, you should be able to push through some choke points, right? Finally, a passing mention should be made to the hit points of the vehicle, 1,400. That's very good. That's way better than the ISU-152 has even now with its buffed 1,200 hit points. And when we compare it to glass cannon tank destroyers like the S1, which are getting one-shot by some tier 10 tank destroyers, especially British ones, this thing should be able to at least take a hit unless it's a penetrating high explosive round or the world's highest roll of an armor-piercing round. And while the hit points aren't quite as good as the AT-15, this should give you the durability to be able to keep that gun singing for as long as you can. Now, 370 meters view range on this vehicle, it's definitely not great. And that's where this tank is a little bit awkward, because if it had 390 or 400 meters view range, I would probably just drop the binoculars altogether, and I would probably take a toolkit on this vehicle to try and keep the tracks up for as long as possible, because you're going to be fighting in close quarters. You don't have a turret. Your opponents are going to want to take off your tracks, and you're going to want to do everything that you can to be able to keep your tracks on this vehicle. But to be able to use a toolkit, unless you want to drop the gun rammer, no. Or you want to drop the vents, I really don't want to drop the vents either, because that's adding pretty much 2.5% combat capacity to every aspect of the vehicle. Then you're going to have to drop the coated optics or the binoculars to be able to take a toolbox. And that's going to give you really, really bad view range. We're talking about kind of sub 4.45 meters view range at tier 8, which is definitely not very good, even if you're using a premium consumable and even if you have an exceptionally skilled crew. And so I guess there'll be two ways to play the Turtle. One will be to try and focus up on having repairs on your crew, using maybe 1 or 2 repair kits on the vehicle, using a toolbox as well, and just trying to get into a close quarters combat fight and engaging there. And considering the poor penetration of the vehicle, I think this is probably going to be the best place to take the tank. Alternatively, I guess you could try and amplify that poor view range up with some binoculars and try and engage at long range and make use of the armor. And at long range, this armor will be fantastic to try and pepper softly armored targets or just aim at weak points. Which is a shame, because if the view range had been a little bit higher, then you could kind of perform both roles both at the same time. And when you're playing in a vehicle that's just so unflexible, like the British tank destroyers are, yeah, trust me, you're going to want to try and get every little bit of flexibility that you can to be able to handle any situation that the enemy team will throw at you, or more often, the map that Wargaming will spawn you on, right? Okay, so while I've talked about what we do know, let's talk about what we don't know about the vehicle. Firstly, the moving dispersion values. That will definitely impact the aim time. The weak points that the vehicle has, while it doesn't look like there are any thin armored plates that the vehicle may or may not have on top of the vehicle will give overmatched chances to your opponents. And so we'll just have to wait to see the full model armor layout of the Turtle before I can really give you guys the full review that this tank, does it deserve? Which may or may not deserve when we see the final statistics. And so all in all, the Turtle, what do I think about it? I think this is going to definitely be a heavy close-up brawler that will punish lightly armored targets. It's definitely not something that you're going to want to take for granted. If you see a Turtle on the enemy team, even with its poor penetration, you're going to have to respect it, because if it does get your side, it is going to rip you apart so quickly for a tier 8 tank. Even if you're playing in your tier 10s or your tier 9s, your 2,000 hit points are not going to go a long way when this vehicle has 3,000 base DPM, which if you fully pimp it out, you're probably going to be able to get up towards the near 4,000 mark. And while I think that it's good that Wargaming are going to be introducing a tier 8 premium heavily armored tank destroyer down the British line, we kind of already had one. We had the AT-15, and I thought this vehicle was perfectly balanced at tier 7. It's basically like taking the armor of the high tier vehicle, dropping it down a tier and kind of balancing out its gun, its view range, and its health points. The AT-15 is still a great tank at tier 7. While I wouldn't say that the Turtle looks like it's going to be outrageously overpowered, I think the fact that it still has the frontal armor that the AT-15 has, it's got a better power to weight ratio, and it's got that better alpha damage and better DPM, while it has slightly less penetration, means that it's definitely probably going to be a far more dangerous tank in close quarters combat than the AT-15. And considering that the heavily armored British tank destroyers, the AT-15 included, already have impressive win ratios, this is definitely going to have to be something that Wargaming take into account when they're rounding off the final statistics of the vehicle, because the last thing that we want is to have another 268 version 4 in the game. Although I think the reason why the 268 version 4 was crazy was because it wasn't limited to 20 kilometers an hour. Anyway, that's it for today, ladies and gents. I hope you enjoyed this one and had a good gander at the preliminary statistics for the Turtle. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, but if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. Let me know what you think about the Turtle in the comments down below. And as always, as it's Friday, have a blooming good weekend. Enjoy it. Go and do some fun stuff. I'll be streaming on Sunday if you end up a little bit bored or a little bit tired and want to have a bit of a chill out. Have a good one, boys and girls. Hopefully I'll see you soon.